Forest spirits. The wolf pup didn't know what warmth was yet. He felt the den's packed heat, his siblings pressed against him, and his mother's slow breathing like a tide. That warmth was alive, scenting of pine, wet fur, and home. But this warmth was different, coming from a box in the wall that softly rumbled with orange light through iron slats, asking nothing in return. That made it strange. Strange things in the forest meant danger. His mother warned him. He opened his eyes and immediately regretted it. The ceiling was low and flat, pale wood, smooth and unnatural, with perfect edges no tree could grow. The smell was overwhelming, smoke, sharp medicinal fumes stinging his nose, and beneath that, the dense scent of human sweat, iron, and an indescribable hot-cold sensation. He tried to lift his head, but pain from his side stopped him. The deep ache spread from below his left shoulder blade to his abdomen. He let his head fall back onto the folded cloth beneath him. He remained motionless, listening. The wall fire ticked and popped. Outside, wind pressed against a solid barrier, perhaps a door or wall of boards with muffled underwater-like sound. Nearby, liquid dripped steadily into a metal container. The entire place hummed with an unsettling calm like being watched. Something was watching. He slowly turned his head, ignoring pain, and saw the man, sitting in a wooden chair across the room, his forearms on his knees, his large hands loosely clasped. He was silent and unmoving, merely watching the pup with pale gray eyes under a heavy brow. His face showed no emotion, no hunger, fear, or excitement, only steady, unreadable attention. The pup had never seen that expression on a human face before. He had observed humans from a far, high ground as his mother advised face into the wind, ridge behind, silent watch, wait 3 minutes after they pass before breathing normally. That was the rule. Humans were fire, noise, metal, and the crack of thunder splitting the air, startling deer mid-stride. They didn't sit quietly in wooden chairs with patient eyes. His instincts urged him to move, his body responded with quiet resistance. He attempted to lift himself. His front legs pushed against the rough cloth, claws gripping the weave, and he managed to raise his chest 6 inches before pain in his side snapped shut like a jaw, causing him to collapse back with a thin sound, neither a whine nor a growl, but something in between that embarrassed him as it escaped. The man moved slowly, like his mother near the den, deliberate and gentle, avoiding sudden moves. He left the chair, crossed the floor, and crouched to the pup's level, the strong human scent filling the space. One large hand reached toward him, and the pup's lips pulled back over his teeth involuntarily. The man paused. He kept his hand near the pup's nose, waiting quietly. The pup growled again, but the man didn't withdraw. The pup's warning grew deeper, yet he stayed still. After a pause, he spoke softly. His voice was rough but soothing, like creek water over stones. The pup didn't understand the words, but they were gentle and quiet, so his growling eventually subsided as there was no threat in the voice. Gradually, the scent of the hand changed over what seemed a very long time. The core human scent remained, but its surface shifted, adrenaline fading, threat signature softening into something calmer. The pup sensed this change instinctively, as he always read the air, and he withdrew his lips from his teeth. He didn't allow the hand to touch him, but ceased growling. Outside, the wind intensified, snow tapped against the window in irregular bursts, and the fire flickered in response to each gust, casting orange shadows on the ceiling. Watching the shapes shift, the pup silently thought of his mother, about her flank against him in the dark, about her quiet exhale as she checked everyone barely audible through her nose, but each pup heard it. He hadn't heard that since she fell, only the bear's roar, the fight's chaos, brush crashing, wet sounds, and a raised voice, something he never heard before and hoped not to again. Then silence followed. He ran as she told them, using her signal now, "Don't look, go." He had run, the ground tilted beneath him, and the pain in his side grew from a sting to something overwhelming. Then snow rose to meet him, and that was the last clear memory. Now there was a ceiling, a fire, and a man with patient gray eyes. Mom taught me to fear fire and humans, he thought, though not verbally. She was right about everything else she told me. But this fire keeps me warm. The two legs still remains, and I continue to breathe. That night, he attempted to leave, waiting until the fire died down and the man moved away, his breathing becoming slow and steady. He then pushed himself upright, first with his front legs, then his back, each move a battle with pain. He stood, legs trembling but holding. The door appeared as a dark rectangle at the room's end, with cold seeping underneath in a thin line, imbued with scents of air, pine, and the freezing dark outside smells that unlocked something inside him he wasn't aware was locked. He moved toward the door slowly, one step at a time. Reaching the threshold, he misjudged the step down to the porch, his front left leg missed the ground, and he began to fall. His weight crushed onto his injured side, and pain overwhelmed him, blinding him with white light. When colors returned, he found himself lying on the cold porch, unable to stand. Snow fell onto his face. Everything was very quiet. Suddenly, the door opened and light spilled out. The man appeared barefoot on the cold planks, crouching calmly and without words. Gently, he slid his hands under the pup's shoulders and haunches, lifting him with the same care as a mother, carrying her youngest steady but gentle, and brought him inside too near the fire. The man gently placed the pup down. He added wood to the fire, then returned to his chair. The pup lay watching him and breathing. If he could have spoken, the pup would have sensed in his eyes the same look Mom had when she turned her back to the wind to shield us. He wasn't afraid of the cold, yet he went out into it anyway. He didn't realize it yet, but his shaking stopped. He didn't try the door that night. As snow on the windows turned gray with dust and smoke, the wolf pup knew the cabin's rhythm so well he could anticipate the man's movements by sound. When he finally heard a faint, high laugh outside, he flinched as if struck by a stone. It didn't come from the creaking boots, the chair's sigh, or the mug's clink, but cut through all with sharp, lively clarity. Before he could judge its meaning, the door opened and cold air poured in around a smaller figure moving swiftly like a wind gust in a coat. The girl entered, trailing snow and noise, her heavy boots thumping loudly, her breath white as she shut the door with both hands. The pup watched her from by the stove, tense and alert. She smelled different from the man, not less human, but layered with soap that carried a faint orange scent, crayons, paper, and something sweet he couldn't name. Beneath it all was the same iron heat of blood, the quick animal pulse. Her hat was nearly as big as her head, with two silly knitted ears that flopped when she moved. She paused abruptly when she saw him, causing one boot to skid on the wet mat. For a long moment, nobody moved. The man turned from the coffee and egg-scented counter. The girl stared at the fire animal, and the pup watched her, focusing on her chest rise and fall, and her fingers slowly grasping the worn leather ball tucked at her hip. He had seen nervous young deer before restless, twitching at shadows and insects, but they never stared at him like this, with curiosity, fear, and delight tangled in their wide brown eyes. "Is that him?" she finally asked, her voice higher yet steady, as if used to talking where adults listened. "The wolf you mentioned." The man responded, but the pup barely heard him, too focused on the girl's hand moving away from her side, lifting the ball slightly, with fingers flexing against its cracked surface. The object carried a faint smell of dirt, grass, human skin, and rubbery old tires. To him, it resembled prey small enough to catch in one bite, easy to chase, and something to keep. The girl stepped closer, her boots squeaking softly on the boards, causing the pup to tense. Not quite threat, not quite anticipation, just readiness that hummed through his muscles, making his tail twitch. "Hey," she said quietly, her tone saying more than her words. It was the same soothing tone the man used when the pup's wound ached and he shifted restless, asking for patience. "You want to play?" She raised the ball to her shoulder, and the pup's eyes tracked the arc, his body instinctively shifting forward onto his paws. The man called her name Emma in a warning tone, but it was too late. The ball left her hand with a clumsy overhand toss, wobbling through the warm air toward him. In that moment, all his lessons on standing still, watching, and remaining silent near humans dissolved under simple instinctive urgency. He jumped, pain flaring in his sight as he left the floor, but momentum carried him through. His jaws clenched around the ball with a satisfying give that ignited joy inside him. Claws scraped the boards as he landed. His focus narrowed to the rubber ball, its texture, the worn grooves his tongue found, and the tiny hiss of air from a ripped seam. He clamped down harder, claiming it, a low growl of triumph resonating in his chest. When he looked up, he saw the girl staring with her mouth open and eyes wide, not out of fear but wonder. Yes, she cheered loudly, so much that he flinched. You caught it. She extended her hands as if expecting something, fingers spread, palms up, and he stared at her for a few seconds, head tilted, the ball firmly in his jaws, his thoughts drifting over his usual rule: chase, catch, keep, eat, or hide, but never return what was thrown away. The idea felt wrong in his bones, like walking downhill blindfolded, yet Emma leaned toward him eagerly, her boots forgotten, coat half unzipped, cheeks flushed with cold, excitement, and hope. Come on, she coaxed softly. Bring it here, boy. The word boy lingered inside him. It wasn't his name, nor did it have sound, but it carried warmth and invitation. He shifted, feeling the dull ache from days of injury, responding to movement with persistent pain. He could turn away, seize the ball under the table, shred it into scraps and spit, or curl around it in sleep, victorious as any wolf. But if he did, he knew without knowing how that Emma's bright eyes would lose their spark. He remained very still, the ball heavy in his jaws, listening to the cabin's layered sounds, the kettle rattling, wind brushing the eaves, his weight shifting as he watched, Emma's coat squeaking slightly with her breath, and beneath all this, his heartbeat steady now, slower than when he first awoke in this strange wooden den. His mother's rules echoed in his mind about humans and their tricks, never taking food from their hands, never letting them touch his face. They had kept him alive in the forest, harsh math, but here, between fire, walls, and scent, those rules no longer fit so neatly. He stepped forward. Emma's breath caught, a tiny sound that filled the room. He moved again, his paws feeling the cool boards, his side pulsing. When he stopped a few feet from her, he saw a faint blue mark on her thumbnail, caught the tang of school glue on her sleeves, and heard the wet click of her tongue swallowing. She crouched slowly, matching his height, extending her hands with palms up, a gesture of trust he didn't fully grasp, but felt nonetheless. They lingered like that, torn between old instincts and something new, until he finally pushed his jaws open. The ball landed softly in her hands, rolling against her fingers and leaving a faint saliva shine. She emitted a sound, half laughter, half breath, like warm water, startling yet strangely delightful. Instinctively, he leaned in, attracted by her joy's scent, and his nose brushed her cool small hand. She paused, then delicately turned her palm and gently rested it on top of his head, where his mother used to lick his fur when they were young and unsteady. He remained still. Her touch was unlike the man's, trembling slightly, soft, yet energetic, and touched a familiar softness he couldn't quite place. She stroked his neck lightly, fingers carefully threading into his fur, replacing fear or pain with a spreading warmth that began where her hand moved and deepened, filling the void left by his mother's absence. She threw the ball again. This time he ran calmly, keeping his injured side tight. As the ball bounced toward the stove, he pounced with less urgency, more playfulness, biting just hard enough without breaking it. He trotted back, proud and purposeful, like a dog at the logging road's edge. When he dropped the ball at Emma's feet and she clapped, a sharp, clean sound in the air, he felt a tiny surge of pleasure. No wolf language or the rules in his den described this, but as the game continued, filled with Emma's laughter and the man's soft curses over bounced balls, the pup began to understand that strength isn't only about holding tight. Winter arrived unasked, deep snow covering the cabin, road, and yard, muffling sounds and changing shapes, until even the wolf's sharp senses needed time to adjust. The plow's distant noise lessened week by week, and on windy days when tracks vanished from the porch to the woodpile, the man would stand at the window, face unreadable, mug in hand, then put on his boots and disappear into the pale trees to check his lines. He left Emma and the wolf alone with the fire and silence. Inside, routine settled as steady as the frost on the window. Emma studied at the table while the wolf, mostly healed, lay stretched on the rug. His skin under the fur was tight where the wound closed, and from time to time she would absent-mindedly reach down, letting her fingers trail his back, a simple gesture that touched him more than he could name. As the days grew slightly longer, the wolf's body sensed something the fridge calendar already revealed, a restlessness in his muscles, not from pain, but a twitch under the skin that woke at dusk, making stillness feel more restrictive. When the man opened the door in the late afternoon to shake snow off his coat or call Emma for wood, the air rushed and carrying layered forest scents, thawing trails, shifting deer, and at the edge of his range, the faint familiar smell of his kin, soft but distinctive, like a faint melody. He became more aware of the caller. Initially, when the man placed the worn leather strip around his neck, the wolf endured it as he tolerated the splint and ointment necessary discomfort for survival, softened by the man's gentle touch and subsequent meat. Yet now, as his strength returned and his legs no longer wobbled when he ran in small circles, the collar's constant weight and its stubborn resistance to his teeth itching him beyond skin or fur. When he reached the chain's limit and felt the jerk at his throat, a hot spark ignited within him, neither exactly anger, but clothes, and his vision sharpened, his body hummed. Instantly, the yard, once vast and full of new scents, shrank into a confined, trampled rectangle of snow and flattened grass. Emma tried to ignore it. She stepped outside, bundled in her coat and mismatched gloves, her breath forming clouds in the cold, carrying the same scarred, dirt-stained ball that had started it all. She threw it repeatedly, farther each day, testing his speed and the chain's length. He chazzed because his muscles yearned to move, and her happiness warmed him, but more often, the ball would stop just beyond the invisible collar limit. He would halt abruptly, snow sprang up around his paws, the leather biting into his neck, while his lungs burned to go further. One evening, as the sun set behind the ridge, leaving a bluish glow over the snow and promising a cold night, the wolf sat at his limit, chain taut, staring into the trees, while Emma stamped her feet and talked about school she couldn't understand. Her words droned softly, but his ears were trained on the dark line where yard met forest. Tonight, the scents were stronger, pulled low by the cold, tinged with musk, hunger, old snow, wet fur, dominance, and longing, a complex aroma no human nose could detect. The first distant howls stretched across the valley like breath from a wound, piercing Emma's words, making her fall silent. Her midden hand paused midair, her head tilting to locate the sound. The wolf felt the sound strike him like a blow, his heart shuddered, his body tensed into focus lines, and a deep vibration rose in his chest before he even drew breath. He hadn't heard pack voices since the night of the bear. Memories flooded back the dense pressing bodies, his mother's chest rumbling as she called them, older males howling to mark territory and strength. Now, the valley's sound conveyed more than hunger. It was a statement: here we are. We've endured the winter's first call, and now we move again. Without thinking, the wolf rose smoothly, jerking the chain enough to rattle the stake, and let out a pure howl that surprised him, layered with youth, confusion, joy, and a sharp ache that felt like his side reopened. Emma's eyes widened. A man in the cabin paused, listening. The pack answered. More layered, complex voices, some high, some low, intertwined in a soundscape carrying primal meaning he felt in his bones, even if Emma wouldn't understand it. It included greetings, challenges, and invitations that triggered memories of running with others, the hot breath and cold air by someone's side. He immersed himself in the sound, momentarily forsaking the yard, house, and human sense, and focusing solely on the forest, clean geometry trails, rivers, silent signals through scent, posture, and sound. The chain restrained him. He dug claws into the packed snow and lunged toward the trees with renewed force, snarling and growling under his howl, instincts awakening after months. The leather chafed his neck, the stake in frozen ground refused to move, and his healed side warned him with a sharp pain he ignored during a reckless heartbeat. His front paws cleared the snowdrift at the fence, but his back feet slipped, sending him crashing down into the snow, the air knocked out as he collides with the ground. He lay stunned for a moment, the distant chorus still echoing in his mind, cold rapidly seeping through his fur into his skin, the iron taste at his throat where he bit his tongue. Emma's boots pounded on the porch, her high frightened voice calling his name, not a real one, but the one she used to get his attention, as she skidded to a halt near his head, falling to her knees in snow amidst her coat, mittens, and frantic, terrified eyes. Easy, she muttered, reaching for his collar, then pulling back, afraid to hurt him further. Hey, it's okay, just breathe, okay, just breathe. He didn't need her words, he needed to breathe again, and after a few painful seconds, he inhaled air that burned with cold and the complex scent of pack and human entwined. He tried to rise, legs trembling beneath him, the old wound throbbing in time with his heartbeat, and the chain pulled taut again, a dull reminder of the invisible boundary he had just attempted to cross. When the man came onto the porch, hurriedly draping his coat over his shoulders, the howls from the valley had softened into distant echoes, fading as the pack moved along a path he almost visualized but couldn't follow. The man glanced at the scene, the wolf tangled in the chain, Emma in the snow with flushed cheeks and wet lashes, the stake tilted slightly in the battered ground, and something in his jaw tightened briefly before relaxing as he approached calmly. He knelt by the wolf, his movements as deliberate as when he carried the broken pup inside, quickly unfastening the collar buckle. Leather scraped against fur and metal, Emma drew a breath, sensing what was coming even before the chain loosened and the collar slid off. For a moment, a tense silence hung, heavy with choice. The wolf slowly stood, feeling the sudden lightness around his neck, as if a whole layer of air was removed. Nothing physically held him now. The snow between him and the trees was pristine, a clear path he could cross instantly if he wanted, and from somewhere distant yet near, the pack's last movement brushed his ears, a final pull at his core. Behind him, the cabin's warmth and familiar scents persisted. Emma's mitten brushed his side, gentle and ungripping, carrying memories of afternoons playing fetch, quiet mornings by the fire, and sleepless nights when she sat beside him while he shivered in his sleep. The man's hand rested heavily on his back, steady without forcing direction, just a presence like the mountain itself, a fact you must move with or around, but cannot ignore. The world seemed to hold its breath. He took one step toward the trees, then another, noticing the snow's texture change as he left the packed paths near the porch into untouched drifts, where his paws sank deeper and the cold bit sharper. Each step loosened something in his chest and tightened another, and with each breath, the scent of the pack grew fainter, not because they were farther, but as his surroundings flooded his senses with conflicting signals: smoke, Emma's shampoo, the stew's rich aroma. He paused, body pointed at the forest, muscles coiled for a long run back to a world that made simple, hard sense. When he turned his head to see the cabin in peripheral vision, Emma's face caught his eye. Her eyes weren't pleading, she said nothing, but watched him with a strange mix of sorrow, pride, and fear. In that look, he saw what he had only ever seen on his mother's face before the night of the bare willingness to let him go if needed, even if it broke her heart. He didn't fully understand, but recognized its shape. The pack's call pulsed in his blood, the fire's warmth called to his bones. His mother's rules pulled him one way, while the softer laws of this wooden den pulled another. He balanced on a thin, painful line, feeling as if his skin no longer fit, belonging neither to one world nor the other, unsure of how to belong to both. After a moment longer measured more by heartbeats than seconds, he turned around, walking back to the porch with heavy, deliberate steps. He climbed onto the boards alone, his side protesting but holding. The man didn't reach for the collar again, nor did Emma hurry him. They simply moved aside to let him sit between them, and as he settled onto the rug inside the open door, the air around him filled with overlapping scents of forest, human, and smoke blurring into his only sense of home for now. The snow didn't vanish, but thinned and shifted, retreating from dark pine trunks into gullies and shadows where the sun faltered, leaving a mottled patchwork forest of damp earth and fallen leaves. The wolf sensed the change before Emma began drawing tiny green shoots and icicles in her homework margins. He felt it in the air's damp sweetness, the wind-carrying layered sense of soil, sap, and thawing bones beneath the needles. His coat shed in clumps, tufts briefly clinging to porch boards and chair legs before falling to the floor, as Emma made exaggerated faces, joking about making a pillow someday, her voice a mix of jest and secret plan. The man observed quietly, his gray eyes noting both the wolf's restless pacing and the shrinking snowpack on the yard's north side. When the first morning arrived without his breath frosting the window, he dressed earlier than usual, layering shirt, flannel, and jacket without turning on the radio, moving efficiently but slowly. The wolf's ears perked at the subtle change, no longer chained after the howling night, yet no free-to-roam lines invisible but firm, drawn by the man's tone when he said stay, and Emma's small hand buried in fur, whispering, "You'll come back, right?" This morning, the man opened the door, shoulder against it, with boots laced and hat low. He looked at the wolf with a warning look that made the animal's skin prickle, recalling the instinct of sharing a trail. He nodded toward the trees in a subtle canine gesture that made Emma raise her eyebrows. He said short words, the tone conveying the message, "Let's go." Outside, the scent of the world felt like a story paused, but now resumed. Trees appeared taller, hollows darker, and the ground under paws a complex map of scent, texture, and temperature readable as easily as Emma's textbooks. The snow and shadows was crusted but soft beneath. When broken, moisture soaked the pads, then springy moss and old leaves cracked softly. Dreamlike bird calls flickered in the branches, connecting trunks with sharp notes. The man moved steadily, stepping over logs and ducking low branches with practiced ease, the wolf shadowing him, sometimes jogging ahead to investigate, then circling back in instinctive respect, preventing him from straying far. They trail a winding game path along a gentle slope, the earth tilting toward a tangle of alder and willow by a narrow creek under melting pressure. As they move away from the cabin, the wolf's breathing smooths into a steady rhythm, ears swiveling to catch distant woodpecker taps and closer rustles. His fur's human scents fade, replaced by the wild's complex aroma of smoke, soap, gun oil, pine, and damp bark, which now seems his true signature. He detects blood before seeing the animal, a hot metallic scent threading through cooler mud, water, and rotting, leaves causing him to stiffen and lift his head sharply, nostrils flaring. His pace quickens instinctively, paws silent on the trail, every step aligning with unseen cues. The man's hand twitches towards his rifle strap, not out of panic, but instinct, as he quickens to follow the same invisible trail the wolf senses. The fawn was half collapsed by the creek, one fragile hind leg twisted at an awkward angle in a gap between submerged rocks. Its sides heaved and it snorted in terror, clouds puffing from its nostrils, while its large dark eyes rolled white as it watched the wolf and man approach. Blood darkened the water near its trapped limb, staining the stream with a rust-colored cloud, and the wolf's world shrank to that scent and color as if nothing else mattered. He moved silently, unaffected by the man's low curse or his hand raised instinctively, muscles coiled, saliva filled his mouth, and instincts sharpened for the hunt. The animal was weak, isolated, backed into the creek and slope, its leg broken, it couldn't escape far. No pack surrounded him, but the distance was small, angles were favorable, and the path was clear. His paws sank softly into the mud, lips slightly peeled in anticipation, not as a threat, but driven by instinct, and a low rumble expressed his ancient primal urge. Suddenly, the man's voice cut through, sharp and commanding, rare for a human. "I leave it." The words mattered less than the tone, which commanded without negotiation. A sudden wall appeared between the wolf and his prey, striking a trained spot in the animal's nervous system, rooted neither in forest laws nor hunger, but in the long, strange winter in the cabin. His head turned sharply, eyes flicking toward the man in reflex, and in that split second when focus broke, the fawn bleated a high, desperate cry cut through his ribs, different from hunger's clean lines. He froze, caught between man and deer, body angled toward the fragile creature, chest heaving quickly. Blood sent thickened around him, intoxicating. His claws dug into the wet earth, sensing its shift beneath him, gauging the strength needed to strike. In another life, a decision had already been made. He would move, jaws closing on the soft neck, a brief struggle unfolding before the rush of life, satisfaction and fulfilling instinct in the wild's purest form. The man moved deliberately between them, avoiding sudden aggressive gestures that would challenge a wolf. Instead, he stepped firmly into the mud, as if intending to take root, with his rifle slung on his back and empty hands held low, one extended slightly toward the wolf, the other toward the trapped fawn's leg. He met the wolf's gaze, conveying respect, expectation, and a quiet plea more powerful than any leash. "Not this one," he said softly but firmly. "Back." The wolf's ears briefly flattened, and he fought the urge to snarl, not out of hostility to the man, but from frustration at the halted chase. His tail flicked, then froze. The muscles along his sides twitched with restless short quivers, and he tasted his own confusion as a bitter tang beneath the blood's rich scent. He understood the man's capacity to kill. He had sniffed it, seen carcasses brought in from traps, and watched how the knife moved through hide and flesh with cold efficiency. In his mind, new rules had formed more complex than the forest's simple calculus of hunger and opportunity about when killing was justified. He paced a tight circle just beyond the man's reach, nostrils flaring, eyes shifting from the trembling fawn to the man's steady hands as they reached for the trapped leg. The human crouched without hesitation, knees sinking into muddy snow, breath fogging the air, and gently touched the fawn's slick hide, murmuring low, meaningless sounds that eased the animal's wild panic slightly. The fawn's ears flicked toward the voice, its breathing eased, and as the man examined the injury, he kept softly speaking, as if weaving a gentle thread of sound between them, less forceful than words. The wolf watched, head tilted, his breathing slowing from rapid panting to rest. Instinct told him the weak die, so the strong survive. Hesitation was a luxury he couldn't afford. Yet the cabin's winter taught him there are other gifts: fire that's not stolen, food found without hunting, shelter earned without killing. These gifts tangled into his bones, and now, watching the man carefully free the fawn's leg from rocks, he felt those lines pull against his old instincts. When a limb came free, the fawn tried to run but immediately stumbled, its injured leg buckling. The man steadied it without hurting, his muscles tensing as he held the wild creature's weight in active help that the fawn sensed on a primal level. Its pounding heart and rolling eyes revealed recognition. It seemed to understand that another predator was choosing not to attack. The wolf stepped back slowly, staying close enough to remain part of the scene's fabric, a shadow of forest laws, standing at the edge of fragile new rules. The man noticed movement, a slight relaxation of his jaw, the smallest sign of relief, revealed his awareness, but he kept his gaze on the task. He wrapped a cloth strip from his shirt around the worst cuts, tying it with numb, clumsy fingers that left blood smears on the fabric. When he finally released the fawn and sat back on his heels, the young deer staggered once or twice, then found a shaky balance on 3 good legs and 1 injured. It stood there, breath heavy, head high, nostrils flaring as it assessed the predators, flanking its narrow, uncertain path to escape. For a moment, the forest seemed to freeze: mud, water, steam, breath, fur, cloth. Then the fawn did something that made the wolf's skin ripple with strangeness. It moved one cautious step toward him. Not toward the man who had freed it, nor toward the thicker cover of willows, but toward the wolf standing in the half-melted snow, paws dark with mud, eyes bright with conflict and something else. It slowly extended its neck, nostrils quivering, and despite every instinct, the wolf did not snap, lunge, or growl. He remained motionless as the fawn's damp trembling nose touched his muzzle, briefly an unlikely gesture in predator and prey. The contact was fleeting, almost unnoticed, but the warm, delicate sensation filled with a muted terror and of trust lingered. The fawn withdrew, took a shaky breath, and limped toward denser trees, flashing its white tail before vanishing into the underbrush. The wolf watched until its uneven steps faded and the blood scent diffused into the forest smellscape. Then he slowly lowered himself onto his haunches, legs seemingly unsure after abandoning the hunt. His stomach clenched with simple emptiness, his mouth watered faintly, body confused by the denied need. Beneath his nerves' protests, an unfamiliar heavy weight settled neither satisfaction nor loss, but something in between, like the relief of a wound being bound. The man stood, joints softly popping, and casually adjusted his rifle on his shoulders. He gazed at the wolf, pride evident in his calm voice that the animal sensed, but couldn't understand soft and matter-of-fact, like when he told him about stacking kindling. Together, they headed back toward the cabin, leaving the muddy bank behind. As they walked, the wolf's restless thoughts spun like the creek, returning to one stubborn truth: he had let go of a meal the winter world would have claimed, and the sky had not fallen. The forest hadn't turned hostile. Rules had shifted, and yet, somehow, he still stood, still breathing, walking beside the two-leg who sought a space where strength meant more than just quick jaws. Spring arrived quietly. It seeped into everything, fueling bark, snow, and skin, even making rocks seem to sweat from thawing. The creek below, silent under ice all winter, roared back to life, rushing meltwater over stones with persistent energy, its sound rising through the trees to the yard. The wolf, leaner, longer-legged, with the awkward softness of a pup, faded after months among drifts and bushes, tensed along the edge where dirt met pine needles and damp leaves, ears up to listen to the once muted now mighty rush. The cabin behind him smelled of wet wool, frying onions, and Emma's paint set, which she had brought to the table by the window when evening light lingered. Inside, she hummed softly while working, the tune faint and half-remembered, calling out now and then to check if he was still there, as if the forest might swallow him in a moment. He responded with subtle shifts, paw shuffles, soft chuffs of acknowledgement, though his gaze was fixed on the unseen woods beyond, where scents shifted daily in subtle ways the humans would never notice. Over months, he learned the forest paradoxes, that a frightened fawn could limp away, living long enough to learn fear's shape, that a trap could be sprung by paws, not jaws, and that the world did not end when prey escaped. These lessons formed a nuanced understanding of survival, but they hit older, harsher truths. Packs moved, territories overlapped, old trails persisted. That morning, with a peculiar tightness in the air and a faint spark of electricity making his fur bristle along his back, he sensed something from his first life returning on the edges of his second, a ghostly scent carried by an errant breeze from afar. It slipped between the sharper smells of damp soil and early wildflowers, and for a heartbeat dismissed it as memory, a trick of his mind stitching longing into the air. Then it returned, stronger, with urine marks on old trees, shed hair on low branches, and the musky scent of wolves moving purposefully through the undergrowth. His heart quickened, his pacing legs sensed urgency, and he moved farther from the cabin than usual when the man checks his lines. Emma called his name once, mildly annoyed, but he barely heard her. An invisible pull in his chest drew him down the slope toward the creek, a route both new and familiar. He weaved past saplings and mossy stones, his body remembering the solitude once marked by danger. The caller was now just a weight, a token of life above. Yet as the cabin's door closed behind him, He felt its presence under his skin, mingling with the man's and Emma's scents. He reached the creek's bank where water widened and slowed, spreading thin over a mica-glinted shallow, rocky bed in the pale sunlight. The air was cooler, damp, metallic from spray, with water noise masking subtle sounds until his ears adjusted, turning the constant rush into background noise. A dragonfly flickered low over the surface. A frog leapt from a rock into the dark pool near the bank. A jay screeched overhead, asserting itself. Amidst this, a swift thread of breath and movement revealed another predator. He smelled him before seeing sudden, overwhelming, flooding his senses. Male, young but not a pup, strong, scarred under fur, with old bracken on his tail, breath likely rabbit, fierce sweat, sharp and faint not from immediate threat, but awareness of uninvited presence beneath it all, a deep resonant note within the wolf like a plucked string blood. Shared birth den, shared milk, brother. He froze, body so still that only his nostrils flared slightly, and his eyes blinked slowly as they fixed on the figure emerging from the alders on the opposite bank. The other wolf moved cautiously, shoulders angled and weight shifting between paws, ready to run or attack if needed. But upon seeing the water's edge watcher, his stance shifted, ignoring territory politics and focusing on history. His ears perked, his mouth open in a possible smile, his tail, once neutral, lifted uncertainly, revealing youthful energy. For a long moment, they stared across the narrow water, observing how time and circumstance had changed each of them. The cabin wolf saw new strength in his brother's chest, longer legs for distance, a small notch missing from his right ear from winter fights. He also noted the thick, unshadowed fur, full of burrs and knotted from sleeping outside instead of by the fire. The creek wolf, in turn, observed a smooth coat, scent of wood smoke and laundry soap, cleaner scars than usual for the forest, and a collar around his neck like a question. Recognition broke the stiffness first. The brother on the far bank suddenly dropped into a playbow, straight from their earliest days, chest low, front legs forward, hindquarters high, tail wide and lively. He barked short and breathy, more pup than adult, bouncing off the rocks and scaring a flock of finches. His eyes shone with pure, simple joy only creatures without language understand. The cabin wolf's body instinctively responded, muscles remembering that game, how their mother watched as they tumbled and nipped, testing limits and learning what it meant to belong through bruises and licks. He dashed into the shallows with a splash, cold droplets hitting his chest and belly, the shock of cold mixing with excitement, but not dulling it. The creek was only knee-deep here, its uneven bottom full of rocks, but he swiftly found his footing and crossed in 3 quick strides, the current tugging at his fur, but not turning him. On the other side, his brother approached calmly, not with aggression, but with a full body lean that made them both tumble into the damp leaf-covered mud. For a few intense seconds, they were a tangle of fur and limbs, snapping jaws near ears and noses, paws pounding ribs, with throats briefly exposed, then covered again, a dance that stopped short of real aggression. They absorbed each other's sense more fully than any greeting could allow, the wolf inhaling the pack's complex identity from his brother's neck, the sharpness of other males, the deeper note of an older female, a potential new mate, and faint traces of pups from a distant bloodline, all mingled with his own scent, a reminder of shared winter dens and weeks before the bear. The creek wolf, in turn, sensed the ghost of human touch, the sterile sting of antiseptic near a healed scar, the steady presence of the man, and Emma's sugar and paper scent blended with pine and dirt. They eventually broke apart, tongues lolling, sides heaving, standing paw-deep in damp earth, their playful chaos giving way to a deeper, more complicated calm. The brother tilted his head, glanced at the collar, then back to the cabin wolf's eyes, something in his own cooled slightly, curiosity giving way to guardedness. He stepped closer, sniffed the leather and metal ring in the filtered light, then followed the scent along the jaw to the ears, where he could smell Emma's fingers in the man's calloused palms, as if they were present. His low questioning whine conveyed layered emotions. Where have you been? Why do you smell like them? What did you trade to survive when the den is gone? The cabin wolf shifted, aware of every trace of his past above the slope, clingy like burrs he couldn't shake, and of the absence of sense he loved their mother's musk, the tang of the runt sleeping against him, both now missing, making the space between trees feel larger. He communicated with his body as best he could, lowering his head in a gesture that was not submission, but acknowledgement, a gentle bump of his forehead against his brother's shoulder, carrying apology, grief, and quiet stubborn pride. He stepped aside slightly to let the wind carry his scent toward the creek, revealing what he had become, even as part of him wished he could hide it. His brother sneezed briefly at the foreign scents and gave a dismissive huff. Turning toward the forest, his ears perked, revealing the pack's full awareness of their location, direction, and range. A short bark, both command and encouragement, escaped him. He climbed uphill, then paused, inviting in silence, come, move, remember. The cabin wolf's muscles instinctively aligned with that call, his body falling into the rhythm, lungs matching pace, heart comforted by others in the winter's vastness. He envisioned the valley from the ridge, the elk's scent, the dawn howls forming a living chorus. Yet behind him around the bend, the cabin persisted, filled with objects, smells, and voices that marked him deep inside. He remembered Emma's shaky handwriting, her crumpled papers she tosses away, only for him to retrieve and chew until she laughed and scolded gently. He also recalled the man's heavy hand on his shoulder after long days on the lines, the warmth of the stove beside him, the silly tender pillow Emma stuffed with his shed fur as a joke, then slept on anyway. These images blurred over the pack's picture, making neither clear, their overlap almost painful. His brother sensed the hesitation without needing to understand why. The playful boyish attitude faded, leaving a wary more mature posture, and when he moved closer again, his nose went not to the collar, but directly to the wolf's chest, pressing against the fur above its heart, as if to sense what lay beneath. When he stepped back, the disappointment in his eyes was not sharp or accusatory, but it stung still like someone wounded by abandonment without the words to accuse. He exhaled softly, almost carelessly, as if to say, you smell like them now, sleep with them, you are no longer one of us. It wasn't a formal banishment, wolves didn't do such rituals, but it felt worse simply stating the fact, as impersonal as weather, but heavy with personal loss. The cabin wolf flinched, sensing the clear divide between his life on the slope and the old life in the valley, an unspoken boundary others did not meet. Hearing that line drawn so sharply, even silently, shattered something long under tension inside him. He responded with a rough layered growl that conveyed defiance, sorrow, and stubborn attachment to both worlds. For a moment they faced each other nose to nose, close enough to feel each other's breath, brothers by form, blood, and memory, yet no longer sharing the same understanding of their shapes. The forest subtly shifted around them. Beyond the next ridge, a deeper voice called, commanding silence and causing creatures to freeze and birds to hush. The pack moved again, the alpha had summoned them. The brother's body obeyed instinctively, just as the cabin wolf's had when the man's sharp command cut through his killing urge at the creek. His ears flicked toward the sound, his tail twitched conflictedly, and he circled briefly, testing if his paws might choose for him. As he looked back once more, something in his eyes was new, not acceptance, but a puzzled acknowledgement that his brother now occupied a space he couldn't follow. He brushed past him again, their shoulders touching briefly, softening his earlier judgment, then turned and climbed the slope, his stride easy and wolf-like, falling back into his pack's orbit. The cabin wolf watched him until the trees hid the last glimpse of his tail, his paws heavy with a weight unrelated to gravity. The water beside him continued its chatter, indifferent. A squirrel scolded from above, annoyed by their brief presence. The world, once seeming to shrink during reunion, now expanded once more, leaving him alone on the bank with 2 cents on his fur and no clear answer to who he truly was. When he finally headed back to the cabin, ascending the familiar trail with slow steps, the scent of wood smoke reached him before the roof appeared. He carried the memory of his brother's eyes and a haunting question: if you are no longer fully ours or theirs, who are you? Winter returned brutal and sudden, crushing the forest after a week of deceptive thaws that had tricked even the oldest trees into relaxing. One morning, the yard was a muddy, icy mess, the air heavy with rot and cold water. The next, the world was glass, every twig encased in ice, footprints erased under a ruthless snow crust that shimmered under an almost painful pale sky. Emma leaned on a chair, groaning it wasn't fair, while the man muttered about false springs and reckless drivers on black ice. The wolf, now fully grown physically but still primitive in mind, experienced a mix of irritation and relief. The cold heightened everything, scents sharpened from mushy to distinct wood smoke, frozen sap, old urine, and faint animal odors from bodies forced into movement by hunger. His own hunger was stark and persistent, fueled by the last rabbit Emma stole from the stew 2 days ago and scraps that didn't fill his ribs. With the man's reluctant approval, he began to venture farther from the cabin, returning to the same door, porch, and warm hand. The man had shown him traps and baited jaws, scolding when he sniffed too close, teaching him human rules. This is mine, that's not. Don't claim what's not yours. These lessons intertwined with those from his mother, creating a world of overlapping invisible fences, human and wild, both ready to bite if he crossed the line. On that cold morning, the sky was a brittle blue, promising no warmth, and the snow under his paws squeaked dryly at midday. He had eaten almost nothing since dawn-frozen berries and squirrel remains, more insults than sustenance. The man had gone out early, checking traps on the distant ridge, while Emma sat at the table with her workbook and hot cocoa, feet in thick socks, her focus drifting toward the window where he had stood, restless. When he opened the door, the forest scent poured in, and the wolf, unnoticed, slipped through the gap, a gray shadow ahead of him. The man hesitated briefly, then gave a small shrug, recognizing the limits of what he could do, and told him simply, be smart. He moved through the trees with a pace between a trot and lope, purposeful, conserving energy for a chase or fight if needed. The cold had transformed the forest from thawed mud into icy ground beneath a light snow dusting, broken occasionally by signs of struggle-frozen crow-bitten carcasses and vomit hardened into sour lumps, remnants of animals' last desperate efforts. He detected the rabbit before hearing it and heard it before seeing it. The scent drifted ahead on the still air, faint but vivid sharp musk of fierce sweat wrapped around the grassy scent of a body that had been eating bark and twigs instead of summer greens. It tugged low in his belly, memories of softer seasons blending with present ache, prompting him to slow, pause careful, wait closer to the ground. A few strides later, a faint, frantic thrashing sound reached him, muted by snow, but unmistakable claws scrabbling against hard surface, small body hitting metal, sharp, wet breathing. He silently advanced, each step a struggle between hunger and learned wariness of man-made sounds. When trees thinned and a clearing appeared, his eyes spotted the trap before the rabbit, not because of size or shape, but because he remembered it from months ago in the cabin's soft lamp glow, when the man explained how its jaws snapped shut, half to Emma, half to him. Just off a game trail, partly buried in snow and fluff, the metal ring was simple yet brutal, teeth gripping a small struggling hind leg. The rabbit's fur, once white enough to vanish into snowdrifts, was now dirty, matted with blood from the steel cut. Its eyes bulged, reflecting the cold sky in tiny blue ovals, and its body jerked with exhausted desperation that had no rhythm. It smelled like life on the brink of surrender, a sharp, peculiar scent of a creature out of options, cycling through frantic nerve storms. The wolf's mouth watered, his throat tightening reflexively for a bite, even as part of him recoiled from the trap. The metal reeked of rust, human touch, oil, and echoes of other animals stacked in an invisible ledger that didn't care if he added his act. Standing at the clearing's edge, his muscles taut, he stared at the struggling prey caught amid dangers he understood beyond instinct. He could ignore the trap, his mother's first advice, if she had been beside him, the wild's basic caution about strange shiny objects that reeked of man and pain. Leave it, pups, it's not worth the risk. There are other rabbits, other days. He could lunge, trusting speed, angle, and luck to snatch the soft body without getting caught. A risky move his experience suggested was possible but uncertain, especially with snow masking the jaws. Alternatively, he could retreat, circle, pretend he hadn't seen this impossible collision of instincts and knowledge, and spend the day chasing shadows while this rabbit bled, trembled, and finally went still near his conscience. Hidden beneath the snow, like a trap, lay the fourth option, the one the man showed him with the fawn, the one that left his stomach empty, yet his mind unnaturally full. He stepped closer. The rabbit froze, eyes widening, breath halting as if the moment stretched. It pressed its body down as much as the metal allowed, trying to vanish into the snow, ears flattened. A faint keening escaped its throat, a sound so soft a human wouldn't hear it over the winter wind. The wolf's shadow cast a gentle second trap, blocking remaining warmth from the pale sun. He stood over it, his breath steaming, eyes fixed on the chain from the trap's jaws to the stake in frozen ground. He recalled the man's hands, moving carefully with a stick at the creek, aiming for leverage rather than harm. He lacked hands, only paws and teeth meant to tear and crush, not delicate prying. Still, from forest and fire, he understood metal's pressure and angle logic. He lowered his head, collar pressing into his neck, and nudged the ring with his muzzle, testing. The cold cut through his thin fur, causing a skin flinch, and instinct briefly urged him to pull back from the clamp-designed device. He ignored it. Gently and awkwardly, he shifted weight, placing his front paws on the trap to feel for solid ground beneath the snow parts that didn't move, like the firm ground under the creek's icy crust. He pressed down firmly, not on the jaws, but on the flat springs beside them, recalling how the man had braced them with a stick, how the metal had resisted, then yielded. At first, nothing happened. The trap stubbornly held, the rabbit's leg tightly caught, its breathing quickening as the teeth's proximity and failure strained its last hope. The wolf adjusted his stance, claws digging into the icy surface, muscles tense in small controlled movements, then pressed again, timing his push with a short exhale, tightening from shoulder to paw. The springs creaked. It was a faint, barely audible sound, but in the stillness of the clearing, it felt like a gunshot. The jaws relaxed slightly, not enough to free the rabbit, but enough to change the pitch of its next whimper, showing the trap could be convinced to open. Encouraged, the wolf pressed harder, feeling the strain ripple through his body, as if wrestling a living animal rather than steel, his hindquarters braced and tail straight for balance. Gradually, the jaws parted. The rabbit screeched, a high raw noise beyond conscious control as its crushed legs slipped free, and blood surged into the damaged flesh. It lunged instinctively, blindly leaping forward and crashing into the wolf's chest, its small skull hitting his sternum. The contact startled both. The now unloaded trap snapped shut behind them with a fierce clang, sending snow into the air and a sharp metal smell, an almost accidental reminder of how close his paws had come to where the rabbit's leg had been. They stayed pressed together briefly, predator and prey linked not by violence but by chance. The rabbit's fur was icy and matted against his chest, its heart pounding so fiercely he felt each beat through his ribs. Its scent was a mix of raw fear, old hunger, and instinctual will to survive, mirroring his own so closely it stirred something inside. His jaws were near. He could lower his head, bite through its fragile neck in one motion, ending its fear and his hunger. The surrounding forest, wolves on the ridge, foxes, owls, bobcats, and hunters would have approved. This was how winter debts were paid and bodies kept moving. The lessons from the cabin, the fawn, and the man's quiet voice when he turned away from easy prey echoed strongly. He stepped back. The movement broke the accidental embrace, leaving a small rabbit-shaped hole in the snow between them. The freed animal staggered, its injured leg dragging, staining the crust with a bright smear that would alert noses for hours. It looked up at him briefly, eyes black and fathomless, an almost unbearable flicker of understanding, then rushed toward a fallen log, vanishing beneath its shadow with desperate, clumsy urgency. The clearing suddenly seemed vast. The trap behind him, its jaws closed and marred where his claws had gouged, showed the struggle's marks, overlapping tracks, red streaks, and the deep imprint of his weight on the springs. The air still echoed with the rabbit's scream and the thick silence afterward in aware quiet. His chest heaved, his stomach clenched, his tongue ran over teeth that had only gripped cold air. He headed back to the cabin, his paws heavy, as if multiple voices debated each step. Hunger shadowed him, accompanied by something slower, heavier, neither pride nor regret, creating a tightness under his skin and a collar that felt too noticeable. When he nudged the door open, snowmelt soaked his fur between the toes, and the warm air carried the scent of meat. The man at the counter had a slab of venison on the cutting board, knife in hand, cheeks wind red, eyes narrowing as he looked for signs of trouble. His gaze quickly scanned for mud, blood, feathers, teasing whether the wolf was successful or not, and seeing only a weary damp animal with a strange glow in his eyes, he seemed to understand. He reached for a piece of meat beside the stove, a hearty chunk, not a scrap, and tossed it skillfully. The wolf caught it midair, teeth sinking into flesh, the taste bursting on his tongue, leaving him momentarily weak. The meat was not his kill. It hadn't been gained through a chase, blood on snow, or the thrill of risk and reward. Instead, it was earned differently by a choice that left no visible mark, yet altered the lives of two small creatures. As he chewed, the sound of the trap snapping and the rabbit hitting his chest replayed in his mind, not as a clean moral story, but as a tangled web of impulses and consequences. In that complexity, a faint new realization appeared. He hadn't just followed orders or mimicked a trick, but acted independently, something neither entirely wolf nor dog, but a mixture. Something capable of noticing a trap in the snow beyond a meal or death. Outside, winter held its breath, ice weighing on every branch, hunger echoing in every hollow. Inside, by the fire, a creature with a collar and wild eyes lay full and changed, feeling uneasy for the first time. The second winter didn't feel like the first, even with the same deep snow and cold, because this time the wolf moved with strength and awareness of his choices. The cabin on the slope endured storms with sturdy wood. Its roof bore a new patch from Emma and the man hammering shingles, their laughter and curses drifting into the cold air. Inside, layers of memory lingered: stew, smoke, wet dog, wax, coffee, and gun oil wiped from metal. The wolf carried all these scents along with pine needles and mud, each telling a story no other animal's smell could. He explored further than before, beyond familiar creeks and ridges, into denser forest where snow concealed deadfalls and traps, which he read as easily as Emma recognized warning signs. The man trusted these wider paths, often watching the wolf fall onto the rug by the stove, head on paws, silent about what he'd seen but unwilling to speak. Emma grew into her long limbs, initially awkward but gradually graceful, her calls after him blending teasing and a quiet habitual plea for him to return a gentle wish like an extra bone inside. On the day the forest turned hostile, the weather offered no warning. It was a gray, heavy afternoon with clouds just above the treetops, pressing down and muffling sound while thickening the air. Snowflakes fell steadily from a wool-colored sky, promising to erase tracks overnight. The wolf trotted easily through it, steam rising from his nostrils, ears alert to faint sounds, the distant ice creaking on an unseen lake, a burrowing scurry under snow, or a woodpecker tapping far off on a dead trunk. He sensed the fox's scent first, a thin, sharp trail weaving through hair, wool, and deer odors. It belonged to a different predator, nervous clever, edged with musk, whose scent carried a blood-stained ragged aroma from a prolonged wound, not an instant kill. He tracked it instinctively, paws guided by the scent, and his mind drawn to puzzles that defied the forest's normal patterns. The trail took him through a narrow draw where snow lay deeper, undisturbed by larger bodies, sinking his legs mid-shin until the cold soaked into his fur. The older trees formed a vaulted ceiling, catching falling flakes and dimming the light like underwater. His scent grew stronger, the blood thickening until it felt metallic and hot on his tongue despite the cold. Beneath it, he detected another familiar signature, his brother, and behind him, the pack, as if supporting a melody. He slowed, instinctively lowering closer to the snow, tail down, ears adjusting precisely. The draw curved left then right, and behind the last bend, the scene unfolded before him with startling clarity, causing his heart to tighten. Near a fallen log, the fox lay half on its side in churned snow, its red coat stark against the white, stained with patches of blood. One of its hind legs was crooked, the swollen joint slick with frozen blood, and its fur along the flank torn in ragged strips, revealing pink wet skin. Its chest heaved rapidly with shallow rasping breaths, and its eyes, once bright amber, now had a glassy, desperate stare as it clung to consciousness out of stubbornness. A pink trail extended toward a stand of young spruce, where snow showed scuffed tracks and red droplets. It had run until exhaustion. 3 wolves encircled it loosely, with the closest his brother dusted with snow, tense shoulders, and focused entirely on the fox like a predator sensing victory. 2 others flanked him, less invested but equally alert, their breaths curling unevenly, ears flicking at the smallest movements of the injured animal. Slightly elevated behind them, the alpha watched an older male with a graying muzzle and a scar pulling one ear down, standing casually, yet alert, as he assessed both the kill and the hunter's behavior. The fox's ears twitched at the cabin wolf's scent, its gaze shifting from the thread of teeth to the gray figure around the bend. For a moment, amber eyes locked on him, recognition flickering, not of knowing him specifically, but of his kind, understanding what the silhouette, smell, and gait signified in forest stories of death for small creatures. The fox didn't beg. If prey and predator had a language for pleading, it didn't speak it. It simply watched, head slightly raised, muscles around its eyes tight, with an inescapable pain. His brother noticed him next, snapping his head around, nostrils flaring, jaw tightening, as he quickly assessed the newcomer's scent and posture. For a brief moment, his face showed the old joy of seeing a sibling, but that quickly twisted into something harder when the human scent on the cabin wolf's fur reached him, thick and unmistakable even beneath snow and pine. His tail twitched uncertainly, then lowered, signaling confusion between family ties and social rank. The cabin wolf entered openly, walking steadily, neither lunging nor crouching, nor showing teeth. He moved with purpose, tall but not puffed, tail neutral, ears forward but calm. The snow squeaked beneath him, startling loose flakes from the branches, and all 3 wolves focused on him, tension rising unrelated to the fox's labored breathing. The alpha lifted his head slightly, interest sharpening, while the subordinate at the far end shifted uncertainly. The brother growled softly, a warning rather than challenge. This is ours, our law, our hunger. Do not interfere. The sound vibrated through the cold air, through the cabin wolf's chest, breaking the draw's silence, causing the fox to flinch and subtly flex its claws in the snow. Behind the present, a memory flickered his brother's snort near the creek, the contemptuous remark about human, scent, and lost wolfness, and layered over the growl, intensifying its bite. He re-smelled the fox, really experienced its scent, letting it wash over him fully, instead of just background behind pack musk and snow. Pain, both old and new, ran through every hair. Infection was taking hold around the leg, a sickly smell telling him this animal, even if left undisturbed, wouldn't run far or fast again. It was prey weak, isolated, slowing its herd if it had one. The forest's ruthless logic saw its loss as adaptation, not tragedy. His stomach clenched at the scent of exposed flesh, saliva filling his mouth, his pulse hammering in his throat, echoing the near misses with rabbits, fawns, and easier prey. He stepped between the fox and the pack, simply shifting his path slightly so his body stood between their jaws and the fox's battered side, paws in the churned snow, weight low, taking more space without puffing his fur. The fox blinked, its eyes clouding with confusion as one death shape replaced another in its view, and a silence stretched over the forest, freezing every twig and pine needle. His brother snarled loudly, a raw sound surprising even him, a growl wolves reserved for serious offenses, disobedience, or boundary crossings. His fur bristled, tail raised, lips pulled back to show white teeth stained with recent kill, turning to face the cabin wolf, leaving the fox behind. The subordinate mirrored the stance less confidently, eyes shifting between the brothers, while the alpha stayed still on his hilltop, watching not the fox, but his younger wolf's alignment. The cabin wolf's lips curled back in response, jaws parting slowly and deliberately, signaling a boundary not with a snarl, but a low, steady rumble like distant thunder felt deep in bones. His tail raised slightly, not challenging but refusing to submit, a silent statement. I won't give way here, not now. His brother's surprise lit his eyes, quickly replaced by anger. Their history of playful fights, shoving and laughing, was now different. This wasn't about food or a spot by their mother. It struck at core wolf pack law's weakness means prey. Hesitation leads to hunger. They moved simultaneously. The younger brother lunged first, muscles tense, then surged forward in a blur of gray and white. His goal was not to kill, but to strike the elder's shoulder to restore the natural order with force. The cabin wolf, alert and prepared, twisted just enough, so the blow grazed his ribs, pain flaring where teeth tore through fur and skin as he tasted blood in his mouth, biting his tongue to endure. They collided in a tangle that sent snow flying, with the fox momentarily forgotten, except as a trembling presence at their skirmish's edge. Claws tore through pack drifts, jaws snapped inches from ears and eyes, bodies slammed together and apart in rapid succession. The subordinate, surprised by the sudden escalation, fidgeted anxiously at the fringe, instinctively lunging forward then pulling back, torn between the urge to fight and caution, as the alpha's steady gaze kept him held back. The cabin wolf quickly realized that his brother's skills remained sharp. He moved with the fluid, brutal grace of someone fighting for survival, bearing the marks of a tough life in scars and muscular cords. Still, the cabin wolf also saw that he had changed in meaningful ways. Lessons from months of sled pulling and rough play had honed his sense of balance and leverage, which he now instinctively used to turn his brother's straightforward charges into glancing blows by shifting weight on uneven snow at the last moment. Yet teeth still found flesh. A solid bite on his foreleg caused white pain to explode in his vision, sparking him to snap back, biting his brother's shoulder, skin giving way with a burst of blood that filled his mouth with his own family's blood. The taste shocked him, piercing his mental fog. He flinched inwardly, and his brother pressed forward again, their bodies colliding so forcefully they both fell in a snarling tangle. They separated at a new sound, not a bark or growl, but a sharp commanding growl from the alpha, like thunder or a snapped branch. Its authority was unmistakable, demanding their attention to maintain the pack's unity. Both wolves froze, chest heaving, saliva and blood on their sides, paws in torn snow, eyes fixed on each other, ears swiveling toward the commanding sound. The alpha descended calmly from his rise, exuding confidence without effort, tail level, head high, gaze calm and calculating. He brushed past the fox, scent of its wounded, ragged body lingering, to stand a few paces from the brothers, feeling the heat from his body against the cold. His eyes first scanned the cabin wolf, noting the collar, human scent, defensive stance between prey and pack, and blood on his leg, then turned to the younger brother, whose adrenaline still trembled through his shoulders and lips hovered on the verge of another snarl suppressed by thought. The moment balanced delicately. The fox, in painful panting behind the cabin wolf, exhaled visible breath, its consciousness fraying but still present. The subordinate hovered nearby, ears pinned, tail low, ready to follow the alpha's lead. The brothers remained locked in a cycle of anger, hurt, and stubbornness that the larger pack had just entered. The cabin wolf felt the weight of the alpha's impending decision, pressing almost physically a judgment that would settle the fox's fate and redefine, beyond words, how far one could break old laws without becoming an enemy. The alpha did not rush, which was more terrifying than immediate attack, because his silence revealed that this was about more than a fox on snow. It was about boundaries shifting within their pack's social fabric. He slowly circled the two wolves, testing the air, paws crunching softly into the churned snow, tail held firm, signaling he was not open to argument and would defend that stance with violence if necessary. As he passed behind the cabin wolf, the human scent hit him strongly, layered over the wild musk, and his lips curled slightly in a brief bare warning, less of threat than distaste at conflicting signals. The wolf remained still, feeling the hot breath on his neck like a brand. His instincts urged him to flatten or lick the air near the alpha's jaw to appear small and harmless until tension eased. Instead, he lowered his head slightly, but held his stance standing firm between the fox and the pack, paws planted, muscles tense, daring the world to break him. His brother watched in a mixture of horror and fascination, aware that his sibling now walked a strange path, smelling of smoke, soap, and steel. Seeing him nearly on equal footing with the alpha to defend prey, crossed a line no dense story had prepared him for. The subordinate shifted uneasily, eyes flashing rapidly as he glanced between faces. The fox's labored breathing punctuated the tense silence. When the alpha finally acted, his communication was nonverbal, growling deeply, a powerful sound resonating from his chest and vibrating through the frigid air into the bones of those present. It wasn't a loud roar or an immediate explosive growl, but an ancient steady rumble and assertion of dominance and control. He then moved closer to the cabin wolf until their noses were mere inches apart, breaths intertwining, eyes locked. In that closeness, he exhaled sharply, conveying multiple messages. You are bound by blood and tradition, you've traveled far, you reek of those who kill from afar in patch wounds, yet you remain strong and haven't bitten me when I approached from behind. The cabin wolf responded instinctively, his body language rooted in a primal language learned long before humans appeared. He lowered his head slightly, his tail dipping in recognition of the older male's status, but held his position instead of submitting, fully signaling readiness to yield leadership challenge, but not the boundary he set with the fox. His throat stayed exposed, signaling understanding of the stakes. His paws stayed put, refusing to give up the critical ground. The alpha's gaze shifted to the fox, whose ragged breaths now whistled, ribs showing through patchy fur, body trembling from cold and shock. The older wolf's nostrils flared, sensing the same information the cabin wolf had noted: infection from the ragged wound, faint scent of weakness, and slim chances of surviving another day or week. It was not, in truth, viable prey. Killing it would nourish only one or two, and leaving it risk scavengers or the forest reclaiming it. He glanced at the cabin wolf, subtly tilting his head and softening his eyes, signaling his choice. His short-clipped growl conveyed the command, leave this one, the pack has bigger needs. The subordinate, caught between outrage and respect, visibly relaxed, his ears lifted slightly, and his tail wagged uncertainly as he stepped back. The brothers stiffened, fur bristling, disbelief and anger burned inside him. He approached the alpha cautiously, body low but jaw clenched, emitting a strained high growl unthinkable save for the chaos clouding his mind. His gaze darted between the fox, the cabin wolf, and his calm leader, silently demanding, "How can we abandon prey while our ribs show and pups whimper in the den?" The alpha flicked an ear sharply, signaling warning, then uttered a low sound, clarifying, "This isn't about meat today, it's about who we share breath with." Unexpectedly, he stepped past both brothers to the fox's side, paused deliberate and steady. The trembling animal's eyes tracked him, claws weakly scratching the icy crust, a reflex still trying to escape even with no strength left to run. The alpha lowered his head for a moment, every muscle tensed, expecting jaws to close, ending pain and confusion with a decisive bite. Instead, he sniffed the fox's side from the torn leg to the heaving ribs and scruffed neck, analyzing every detail. When he straightened, he gave a sharp bark, not at his packmates, but toward the forest beyond a command to go. Though the words weren't meaningful to the fox, the urgency and harsh tone struck its nerves like a stone. With a convulsive effort, it rolled onto its belly, dragging its injured leg, and started crawling toward the dark roots and sheltering underbrush, offering a fleeting illusion of safety. Blood smeared the snow along its trail, signaling its path to predators, but in that moment, with the alpha's gaze elsewhere and the cabin wolf's body blocking the pursuit line, it had an unlikely chance. The brother looked as if he'd been struck. His jaw dropped slightly, his breath fogging in quick outraged bursts, his eyes wide with shock at seeing his littermate and leader colluding in a law violation. He made a choke noise, half whine, half snarl, and stepped forward to block the fox, aiming to restore order. The alpha swiftly turned, lips peeling back in a silent snarl that radiated threat, causing the younger male to pause mid-step, pause skidding on the pack's surface. The message was clear: questioning me is dangerous, there's a reason you don't yet see. The brother's ears flattened, then rose slightly, torn between defiance and obedience, his tail twitching high, then drooping, a sign of wolves, knowing challenging their alpha directly risks death. The cabin wolf watched with his heart pounding, realizing the older male's mercy was also a test. By sparing the fox in front of the small crowd, after his subordinates' anger and hunger, the alpha was testing whether the pack could accept a member with foreign sense and customs without breaking apart. When the fox finally vanished into the root tangle, its tail disappearing into darkness, the alpha returned to the three wolves and approached the cabin wolf slowly. He closed the gap until their shoulders almost touched, then lifted his muzzle, drawing a long breath near the collar to taste the human presence in the fur. His eyes, meeting the younger male's, expressed both resignation and reluctant respect. He briefly but gently bumped foreheads, not a dominant shove, but a ceremonial gesture acknowledging change. You are not what you were, yet you stand and endure your choices. Then he stepped away. That small move signified a significant shift, barely perceptible to humans, but massive in their world. He didn't fully turn his back, he was no fool, but passed the cabin wolf without the wary glance given to strangers, treating him as one would a strange but accepted family member. To the subordinate, it was a clear signal: this one is not to be driven off yet, perhaps never. To the brother, it was a blow that struck deeper than any bite. The younger male's gaze burned as the alpha passed, his body trembling with the effort to suppress a howl that threatened to burst free. Standing in the half-trampled snow, ribs heaving, he looked at his littermate with eyes full of anger and bewilderment, an aching question. When he spoke, his voice was a raw, broken whine rising into a low, accusatory growl, sounds tangled to show he was spared, but questioned the twisted rules his father seemed to approve. "What does that make me? What about us?" The cabin wolf had no answer in any language he knew. He could only stand, wounded and streaked with red, meeting that look with one of apology, stubbornness, and fierce, quiet conviction earned through countless nights by the fire, every trap, and every life spared. He made no attempt to approach his brother, he didn't lick his face to calm him, nor show triumph with teeth. Instead, he held his position, letting his choice and the alpha's reaction speak between them. Sensing the danger had passed, but that something deeper had shifted, the subordinate shook off snow and trotted away, nose to the ground for newer trails. The alpha paused briefly, then followed with measured steps, lifting his head to give a short rallying bark that there were other prey, and time was not on their side. The brother hesitated longer, a moment stretching painfully, then turned away with stiff shoulders and a tense tail indicating internal chaos. As he passed the cabin wolf, he gave him wide berth, leaving hurt and unresolved questions in the gap, but avoided snarling or attacking an exposed leg. His breath, as it briefly brushed the cabin wolf's fur, carried not hatred but a more dangerous complex awareness that his littermate Strange, smelling of two worlds, had faced prey and pack without succumbing. Once their retreating steps faded into the snow's hush and distant winter sounds, the wolf exhaled, trees settling, flakes drifting down from rattled branches. He stayed long in the blood-stained snow, his breathing slow as adrenaline faded, leaving bruises and a steady ache in his bitten leg. Turning to the roots where the fox vanished, he sensed faint traces fear, pain, a fragile life, possibly lost before dawn. Most likely, he'd never know if it survived, if another predator's nose found its trail, or if infection would defeat the teeth. What he did know, feeling his skin tightening, was that he had made a choice before only his own reflection, and that choice had not led to exile or death, but to a complex acceptance shaping his future path. When he finally moved toward the distant trees marking the cabin, snow muffled his steps, and he bore new wounds and stiffness, yet also something less tangible and more enduring. He knew the bridge between worlds was built gradually, plank by plank, through moments like this when his teeth could have done one thing, but his heart chose another. The wild, embodying its oldest laws in an alpha stride, had decided not to break that bridge today. That night, the girl disappeared into the forest, began like any peaceful evening, with a clear starry sky and the moon carving a pale line among the branches. The cabin's windows radiated a warm glow, fogged at the edges from inside, and from the yard, he could hear Emma's voice echoing through the walls, reciting something resembling a long, winding howl broken into words. The early spring air was cold, not biting winter chill, but damp and insidious, seeping under fur and coat, bringing the scent of thawed mud, wet bark, and faint rot beneath the snow. He lay at the yard's edge, nose over the dirt pine needle boundary, body pointed toward the trees, ears perceiving the layered sounds of the ridge, the creek's murmur below, an owl's questioning hoot, the distant shift of ice on a far pond. The pack was not nearby. He sensed them as a vague inner knowledge, out beyond the valley, following their own trail. The silence felt strange, a quiet space where their presence usually pulsed, until an unfamiliar, thin sound drifted in an odd noise, not belonging to any forest voice. It started as a faint stuttering echo down the slope, too quiet to decipher, but rhythmic enough to confirm human origin, a high broken sequence of syllables rising and falling in unusual patterns. It was neither the deep rumble of the man's voice nor Emma's lively laughter. Instead, it had a raw, unpredictable edge that made his nerves twitch. He lifted his head, nostrils flaring, and a shifting breeze carried a scent that snapped him to attention like a gunshot. Human, yes, but unfamiliar, not the steady comfort of the man nor Emma's sweet paper and paint aroma. This scent was lighter, sharper, with a hint of cheap detergent, stale car exhaust, and beneath that, a strong, immediate scent of fierce sweat. There was pine, cold air, earth, bark, and damp wool, but no trace of smoke or the familiar aroma of their cabin, no sign of home. It was a stranger's scent, stirring unsteadily below in the dark. The man heard something too. The wolf could sense from the tense stance inside the cabin, the scraping of chair legs on the floor, and the quick shuffling of boots near the door. Emma's voice halted mid-sentence, her heartbeat audible in his ears through the wall. Then the door suddenly swung open, spilling warm light onto the yard and washing over him with their scents. The man paused, head tilted, listening, hand already reaching for the flashlight hanging on a nail. When a clearer cry came, a single drawn-out word, cracked in the middle, calling for help. He cursed softly and stepped onto the porch. the boards creaking beneath him. "Stay here," he ordered Emma, voice firm despite her protests, then turned off the porch light to see better in the dark, the flashlight held ready. The wolf had already moved, slipping silently past the edge of the light, paws finding his familiar path down the slope. The man saw the gray shape pass and called her name, now in a sharp, urgent voice that signaled warning and request. The wolf paused briefly to meet his gaze in the half-light, sensing the deep worry for the stranger, Emma, and himself. In that moment, something like understanding crossed between species. Then he turned into the trees, senses wide open to the night. Beyond the cabin, darkness quickly deepened, swallowing the faint glow from windows, leaving only moonlight filtering through branches, casting pale shadows on the forest floor. As a creature suited to these conditions, he adjusted his eyes, noticing details and shadows, ears attuned to subtle sounds amid the wood's hum, nose reading the air like a familiar language. The girl's scent was clearer here, lingering on low shrubs where her coat brushed, on the snow where her boots slid. Beneath her fear and washing detergent, he detected faint sweet notes of a school cafeteria, chalk dust, rubber basketballs, crayon wax. She was young, a year or two younger than Emma, still in that awkward phase where limbs outgrow understanding. He tracked the scent around fir trees and through a narrow rocky gap where snow piled deeper, his paws leaving clean prints beside the girl's clumsy, smaller ones. She had veered off the main trail to town, possibly drawn by the creek or flickering movement, and now her path twisted in panic-sharp turns, crossing tracks, footprints stamped where she spun to find her bearings in a featureless world without familiar markers. He found her after sunset when the forest had become night's domain, softening edges and filling spaces with fears of teeth and claws, stories to keep children from wandering too far. She sat curled at the base of a pine on a dry patch amid dampness, her legs drawn up, arms around them, face buried in her elbows. Her small backpack lay nearby, one twisted strap and half-open zipper, suggesting she had started searching before fear overtook her. Her silent sobs had long lost their sound, only shallow breaths and small whimpers escaped, fogging the air before cold gusts erased them. Her hat was gone, her hair tangled with bark and leaves, and her fingers, gripping her jeans, were bare and red, knuckles swollen from holding onto low branches or rocks when she slipped. Her fear's scent was nearly overwhelming, sharp and sour, thickening the air like an extra layer. The wolf paused at the edge of the clearing, shadows holding him back briefly as he watched her. His instincts warned that any sudden move would make her dash, risking contact with something worse than this spot. His lessons about frightened creatures, Emma, with a scraped knee, a trapped rabbit, a fawn taught him that stillness sometimes works better than words. He slowed his breathing, easing the tension from the chase, then stepped carefully, placing each paw softly on ground unlikely to crack. Still, she heard him in the night forest. Her hearing, deprived of sight, picked up every sound. His rhythmic padding, the shifting of branches, registered as something distinct from the wind or water. Her head jerked up, eyes wide, faint light reflecting, flashing briefly like an animal's in the gloom. She briefly struggled to find him, turning her head with wide eyes. When his silhouette appeared against the dark trees, recognition dawned gradually, first just a shape, then 4 legs, a tail, and finally the narrow head with forward eyes and gleaming teeth. Her breath hitched, and her next gasp seemed muted. She did not scream. Perhaps her fear had already silenced her. Hands pressed against her lips, as if to mute sound, she backed into the tree, trying to meld with its trunk. For a moment, he saw in her eyes an image of himself, not the friendly dog from stories, but the nightmare version from warnings, ravenous, savage, attracted to lost children. He paused and sat down slowly, appearing unthreatening as his body folded inward, making him smaller, less a rushing force, more a presence. Keeping his head slightly turned and avoiding direct eye contact, he knew from the cabin that eye contact from predator to human signals challenge. His tongue lolling slightly indicated non-aggression, and his tail rested loosely on the ground, not tucked in fear. The forest around them was quiet. An owl called again, a small animal scurried nearby, and a faint breeze stirred the branches with colder air. The girl watched him, her chest rising rapidly, pupils dilated in the dim light. Her hand moved cautiously from her mouth, trembling fingers, and she whispered hoarsely, her words fractured by chattering teeth. Please, she said, though whether for him, the forest, or some distant adult still searching, she might not know. He advanced slowly, keeping his head low, and when her scent fully surrounded him, detailing shampoo, cafeteria residue, cotton, and candy, something in him responded not as a hunter, but as the creature who had bled and waited on the same ground, smelling of fear, mud, and pain until carried toward heat. He closed the gap until his nose nearly touched her shoe, then rested his chin on the ground, breath fanning her rough fabric. Up close, her panic scent was overwhelming, but beneath it, a faint trace of relief so subtle, it might be imagined flared because he hadn't attacked her as her worst fears predicted. She hesitated to reach out, yet her shoulders relaxed slightly, knees uncurling, feet grounding as she considered standing again. Her eyes shifted from his teeth to his eyes, then to the worn leather collar with a metal ring catching faint light. In that moment, everything changed. Stories about wolves from screens and whispers rarely included ones with collars. You're, someone she whispered, barely forming the words as steam in the air. You're not wild. He couldn't understand her words, but he sensed her tone like when Emma realizes something important in homework or sees a shape in clouds become a dragon. He lifted his head slightly to make eye contact, steady and aware, showing the intelligence behind his gaze instead of a threatening stare. His ears pricked forward, then swiveled as distant, heavy sounds reached him, the slow crunch of branches under weight, muted paws and slush, and a low breath through a broad chest. The bear's smell arrived a heartbeat later, thick and musky with the sour staleness of a den, annoyed at being disturbed. It came from downslope, near the creek bend where winter lingered longer than in the valley, edged with irritation and hunger. His body snapped upright, nerves alert, head turning toward the threat. The girl instinctively followed his gaze, though she couldn't see or understand the scent or sound. The shift in his posture, muscles tightening, tail stiffening, told her enough. He had to decide quickly, using both his wild instincts and knowledge from the cabin. The bear wasn't yet visible through the trees, but its path, if straight, would cross their hiding spot at the pine's base. During this season, half-starved bears emerging from hibernation were unpredictable, irritable, their threat sensors easily triggered. A lone child on the ground and a lone wolf beside or might be seen as competition, annoyance, or prey. He rose and moved to her side, shielding her from the sound as he had done with the fox and pack, but with new stakes. She flinched when his shoulder touched her arm, then froze, her hand instinctively clutching his fur for warmth and stability, the only living thing nearby to touch. Her fingers gripped his neck fur tighter as the bear's scent grew stronger, paws crunching through wet snow and thaw. She trembled more, not just from cold, but from an instinctive fear of unseen danger. He turned his head and nudged her knee with his nose, a firm reminder. She looked down at him, trying to hold onto darkness ahead. He stepped back from the tree, then glanced over his shoulder, ears up, tail flicking urgently, signaling her to follow. When she froze, overwhelmed by unknowns, he backed up, nudging her harder until her legs slid forward in the leaf litter, where she whispered, struggling to speak, then planted her feet against the tree trunk, trying to stand. Her knees wobbled, almost buckling, and her hand rarely left his fur, sliding from his neck to his shoulder as she rose, relying on him for balance. He waited until she steadied, her breathing shifting from gasps to rapid, controlled inhales, then moved again, veering away from the bear's approach toward a narrow game trail he knew one, that curved around a boulder and led swiftly to the cabin's ridge. The bear's heavy footsteps grew louder behind them, the thuds of an animal too big to be silent, crashing through the undergrowth with reckless strength. The wolf's ears tracked its movements, calculating distance and adjusting their pace to avoid full-blown panic or delay that might invite an encounter. The girl stumbled on the uneven terrain, her boots catching roots hidden under sparse snow. Each stumble made his body lean toward her, offering support, a living handrail in a world suddenly lacking flat ground or clear paths. As they ascended, forest sounds grew sharper not because there were more, but because her mind, free from city noise and familiar sights, picked up every crack and rustle as danger. A branch snapped left, startling her. She gripped his fur tighter, feeling the pull and hissing in her breath. He quickly glanced, nostrils flaring, sensing only distant deer fleeing from the approaching bear. He slowed slightly to avoid pulling her, signaling calm through pace. The trail narrowed at a fallen tree, forming a choke point, its trunk half buried in snow and slick from thaw. To pass, they must duck under a narrow arch, pressing close. The bear's scent grew stronger, its rough grunts and fur-brushing sounds echoing through the brush. The wolf pressed against her hip, guiding her toward the gap. "It's too small," she whispered, panic rising as she saw the dark, tight space beneath the tree, her mind imagining claws and teeth on the other side, or getting stuck with something massive descending. Her feet froze, muscles tense, desperately wishing to go anywhere else. He turned his head, pressed his nose against her hand where it was knotted in his fur, warm and moist on her cold skin, then slipped under the log, disappearing briefly into the narrow tunnel. On the other side, he looked back, nudging his muzzle through the opening, his eyes catching the faint starlight silent signals. I'm here, follow." Behind them, a branch cracked loudly as the bear shifted uphill, its bulk pushing aside smaller growth, the sound reminiscent of a snapped bone in the quiet. That noise was impossible for him to ignore. The girl fell to her knees and crawled, scraping her shoulders on bark, dirt smudging her coat, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She was engulfed in darkness, the damp wood scent, feeling claustrophobic until she burst out the far side, gasping, her hand instantly seeking his fur as if everything else in the forest was fragile. They climbed higher, the slope steeper, the bear's noises fainting as it continued along its path, unaware of their small struggle. The air grew colder with altitude, wind tugging at our hair and fur, and then she caught a familiar smell, smoke, wood smoke, the sweet scent of burning logs. It clung to them like an invisible thread, pulling at a part of her that still believed in homes and streets, not dark, limitless woods. Her knees almost gave out from relief, tears burned behind her eyes, not from fear, but from the overwhelming hope of returning to walls and light. She stumbled, but when she hit the ground, she didn't curl up. Instead, she pushed herself up with the wolf's steady presence, her breath ragged with disbelief, trying to suppress the noise, as if losing control might erase this fragile reality. A faint warm glow appeared through the thinning trees, filtering through trunks and branches. The cabin's shape emerged slowly, familiar to the wolf more than any rock or den, with a chimney emitting faint smoke that shimmered in the moonlight. On the porch, the man's silhouette stood dark against the window, rigid shoulders, head slightly bowed as he gazed into the night. His unused flashlight still held, his posture betrayed tension and responsibility. The girl paused at the tree line, becoming self-conscious, suddenly aware of rules about not running or knocking. She hesitated, fingers lingering on the wolf's fur before dropping her hand, then took a few tentative steps, her boots crunching on snow. The wolf walked beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, matching pace without leading or following. The man noticed them and hesitated, the scene taking a moment to settle, the girl, unfamiliar in form and smell, and the wolf, mud splashed and alert, side by side like a story illustration he had never been taught to read. The human moved down the steps, snow crunching underfoot, breath fogging in the cold. He called out, his voice steady but rough, and the girl, half sob and laugh, hurried to him, her stiffness fading instantly. She collided with him in a tangle of limbs and coat, her words spilling out lost, sorry, scared, thank you not truly parsed. He instinctively wrapped her in his arms, checking her for injuries as he had with the wolf months earlier. Their eyes met briefly over her head, conveying unspoken fears, gratitude, and anger at a world that abandoned children to the forest, relying on chance and instinct. Emma appeared in the doorway, barefoot on warm floorboards, her hair messy from anxious pacing, eyes wide at the sight of the girl and the wolf, who stood quietly nearby, marked with dirt and small scrapes from their hurried ascent. The man gently led the girl toward the porch, his hand firm at her back, voice soothing as he promised warmth, a call, and later, questions. Before heading inside, he approached the wolf in 2 quick steps, placing a firm hand on its thick fur between the ears, a gesture heavier than words. His palm lingered there briefly, fingers pressed gently, and his soft voice, almost inaudible to humans but clear to the wolf, said, good conveying praise, pride, and a deeper acknowledgement of the wolf's transformation. Emma, at the door, wiped her nose with her hand and offered a shaky, bright smile that crinkled her eyes as the rescued girl disappeared into the light, swallowed by warmth and voices. The wolf, watching her go, felt the forest behind him and the cabin ahead no longer opposing forces, but parts of a whole he could now stand between without feeling torn apart. The following winter developed slowly, with the season undecided whether to loosen or tighten its grip. Sometimes the snow softened beneath his paws, with water running beneath the crust. Other days, the sky turned icy white, and cold snapped trees with distant gunfire like cracks. The wolf moved through it all with newfound confidence, his body fully mature, muscles carrying the memory of paths between cabin and valley. His coat thickened for winter, yet beneath the fur he was leaner, shaped by life's rhythm alternating between the ease of resting at the cabin and the honest hunger of the forest. In the town below the ridge, his presence began leaking into conversations unexpectedly. The lost girl's parents, pale and trembling, listened to her hesitant account of the night, the towering trees, breath visible in the cold, the unseen bear felt through vibrations, and the gray shape with yellow eyes and a collar walking ahead until smoke scent wrapped around them like a promise. Initially, the adults exchanged doubtful looks, their eyes hinting that fear fuels stories, children imagine things. However, as she persisted with details coarse, fur under fingers, a wet nose nudging her knee, the animal pausing when she stumbled, skepticism faded, and her account seemed less imagined. The man said little, indicating volumes he found her near the cabin, and suggested his wolf was drawn to her fear and had shadowed her. He emphasized her safe return despite the strange events in the woods. The sheriff, sipping bitter coffee, asked pointed questions about wild animals on leashes that might be hidden, but as he left, he patted the wolf's head, the gesture revealing more acceptance than words. In small towns, news traveled fast through whispered conversations at the diner, the hiss of gas pumps, the clink of change, or kids over exaggerating stories on the bus. Some believed the animal found her by chance, others that the man trained him as a search dog, while others still thought the girl imagined the caller to understand a wild creature that, by all accounts, should not have survived. Beneath these ideas, a deeper, harder to define feeling lingered, a quiet, reluctant awe at the notion that a creature, long regarded as a killer of livestock and a child stealer, had done the opposite in this case. The wolf knew nothing of these rumors, but he sensed their impact through subtle changes in the world as he accompanied the man into town for supplies. Car doors now stayed shut upon arrival or opened cautiously. Faces in windows watched him with wary curiosity instead of hostility, glancing at the caller, his gait beside the man, and his sit commands. Children pressed their hands to glass, forming silent words: wolf, look, see, and he picked up on their faint fear, softened by fascination. The night of the ravine followed a spell of weather that tempted even the cautious into risky behavior. A brief warm period melted the ice on higher slopes into a misleading water sheen, making old logging roads look passable and hunting tracks appear less dangerous than they truly were. The man had stood on the porch earlier, watching a pickup with out-of-town plates pass below, its bed filled with gear and bright orange caps visible in the gray sky. He grunted, expressing his opinion without words, as Emma, clutching her school notebook, stood nearby and wrinkled her nose in instinctive mimicry. Tourist, she said, the single word embodying teenage judgment, ignorance, carelessness, trouble. That night, the temperature plummeted sharply. Clouds gathered gradually, swallowing the stars one by one, and the wind then intensified, moaning through the pines and causing the cabin's eaves to creak. The falling snow was fine and dry, propelled sideways by gusts that seeped under doors and through clothing or fur, making breath a constant effort to stay warm. The wolf lingered at the window, watching the white streaks outside, paws shifting restlessly on the worn rug. The storm made the world seem smaller yet more perilous, scents blurred, sounds muted, distances harder to gauge. When the call came, it was almost swallowed by the storm, not a howl or a bear's bellow, but a faint ragged shout torn apart by wind against the cabin walls. The wolf's ears twitched, he turned, nose up, trying to sense through the snow's thick veil. The man, at the table with maps and a pencil, paused, his hand frozen over the paper, as his less acute hearing detected the faint sound. Emma, lying on the floor with a book and the wolf's side for a pillow, felt his muscles tense beneath her cheek and lifted her head, hair falling into her eyes. The second cry was hazier, muffled by coughs, but nearer. The man instantly rose, the chair sliding loudly back, leaving a fresh scratch on the floor. He took his coat from the hook, the heavy one for long nights outside. His hand reached for the flashlight, then hesitated before grabbing the first aid kit by the stove. Emma also moved, grabbing her hat and gloves, her face pale but firm, opening her mouth to say she was coming. He stopped her with a look, their silent understanding, storm, darkness, unknown voices, cliffs ahead. Stay, he said softly, a familiar command for the wolf, but his eyes were gentle and pleading. Keep the radio on. If I don't return in 2 hours, call. She nodded firmly, a silent acceptance of both her desire to argue and her willingness to obey. The wolf was already at the door, nails tapping as he faced the howl, nose twitching at the snow's scents when the man cracked it open. The biting cold hit like a slap, sharp and blinding, filling the doorway with icy air that smelled of pine pitch cracking in the freeze, of fresh bruises on the world's surface. The man looked down at him, their eyes meeting briefly shared history in that glance. The bear, the fawn, the rabbit caught in a trap, the fox, the girl in the dark. He didn't order him to stay this time. Instead, he nodded once, silent acknowledgement that some paths are faster and safer for paws than boots. They plunged into the storm together, the flashlights beam carving a narrow flickering tunnel through the swirling snow. For the wolf, the world narrowed to that cone of light and the space just beyond, where his senses told him more than human tools. The snow stung his eyes and the wind he blinked often, lashes icy and gathering, fur slicing through the drifts with the sound of torn cloth. The man's breath came in rough bursts behind him, slower than the animal's but steady, driven by the same stubborn core that had taken him into the forest to find a dying pup 2 winters ago. The scent of the stranger calling for help pulled him forward, a jagged line of urgent information cutting through the storm. It carried blood, sharp and fresh, along with the medicinal smell of city soap, stale cigarettes, rust from a gun, and rising panic from someone who knew the forest, didn't care about his confidence or 4-wheel drive. The trail led toward a ravine, a scar on the mountainside, a place the wolf had learned to avoid in all seasons, its edges icy and treacherous under snow, its depths icy bowls. He reached the edge before the man, paws slipping on packed snow that gave way to a steeper slope. He stopped in time, claws digging in, body shifting to prevent slipping, and peered over. The ravine dropped sharply, its sides a jumble of exposed rock, snow, and sparse trees clinging awkwardly to the walls. 15 feet below, the human was half buried in snow, one leg twisted unnaturally, face gray in the dim light, blood bright on his temple against the washed-out landscape. His eyes were open but unfocused, blinking slowly as snowflakes melted on his lashes in tiny beads before the cold took them. His breath formed thin, irregular puffs, each effort seeming harder than the last. The scent of pain emanated from him, mixed with the earthy odor of swollen bones, torn muscles, and a body beginning to shut down in the cold and concussion. The man reached the edge, his boots slipping the final foot, grabbing a sapling to hold on. He cursed softly, eyes darting across the ravine's steep, slick sides, evaluating escape options. Without ropes, climbing safely in this light was impossible. Any mistake risked falling and breaking his leg, adding to his casualties. The stranger below seemed aware of them now. His sluggish gaze rose the slope, spotting the man's silhouette above, and the wolf's head beside him, ears pricked, breath steaming. For a moment, primal fear flashed across the hunter's face, not from the fall or injury, but at the sight of a large closed wolf staring down at him while broken in the pit. Yet even in fear, a flicker of recognition appeared. The wolf wore a leather band, standing beside a human. Confusion clashed with childhood tales of the wild wolves circling the dying bloodied wolves dragged from under porches. The man shouted down, his voice carried by the wind, offering assurances, instructions, promising he wouldn't abandon him. The stranger's lips moved, forming fragments slipped, ice, thought it was solid, ankle, gun interrupted by groans when he shifted. The wolf watched, eyes tracking every move, his mind already considering the forest between here and town. They couldn't lift him alone quickly enough in this weather without risking their own safety on the icy rocks. The only solution was to summon others with hands, ropes, blankets, or a stretcher from a place with lights and supplies. Humans communicated through wires, waves, and glowing devices. Their voices traveled invisibly when buttons were pressed and plastics pressed to ears. These systems depended on bodies moving to activate them. The man's radio in the cabin had limited range. Emma's small hands couldn't reach the town's emergency lines before his shallow breaths ceased in the storm. The wolf looked toward the road hidden under snow, but in his mind as a faint scent of oil, rubber, and exhaust, then down again at the man in the ravine. His teeth chattered rhythmically, signaling a body losing heat. He pressed his shoulder into the man's thigh, testing, and the moan confirmed what his nose already sensed, that the leg shouldn't be moved, as the bones were misaligned and tissues protested even slight pressure. He made his choice. Without waiting for a command or plan in a language he couldn't fully understand, he turned from the ravine and sprinted up the slope, his paws finding grip where the man's boots had slipped, his body slicing through the snow with single-minded urgency to survive. The man called after him once, a sharp shout of his name that conveyed fear of losing him and a fleeting understanding. Then he returned to the ravine, his voice steady as he spoke to the injured stranger, words intended to keep him awake and anchored in the moment, preventing him from slipping into the snow's numbness. When the wolf reached the road, it was a solid white strip beneath the storm, its edges blurred into ditches and fields. He ran along it toward the town, paws slipping on hidden ice, then recovering, breath fluctuating with each step, his heart pounding. He'd never gone so far solo toward the human settlement before. Usually he rode in the truck or waited at its edge while the man went inside. Tonight, driven by slow failing breaths and the scent of blood, he was pushed beyond his usual limits. Lights appeared ahead as faint halos in the swirling snow, marking the first houses on the outskirts. As he approached, the odors shifted from wood smoke to sharper smells of gasoline, garbage, cooking fats, laundry exhaust, and the layered perfume of many close together. The storm muted typical sounds of such areas, leaving only the occasional dog bark, door clank, or footsteps on a porch. He slowed slightly, entering the first street. His presence caused minor reactions: a barking dog lunging against a fence, a curtain twitching with a paleface watching, a car door half open with a driver frozen, keys in hand, as the wolf's gray form passed under a streetlight. He ignored their fear and disbelief, heading toward a building he recognized by scent as the sheriff's office near the square with its flagpole and snow-covered metal bench. He leapt onto the porch and slammed into the door, making it shake. Inside, voices and paper noises suddenly stopped. Moments later, the door swung open, releasing warm air with coffee, paper, wet wool, and gun oil scents. The sheriff held a foam cup, his hat back, ready to scold, but froze at the sight before him, muttering a whispered curse. The wolf, panting and steaming, with snow on his whiskers, pushed past him into the office, ignoring surprised reactions. He then turned and, driven by pure urgency, barked loudly, pivoted, and dashed back toward the door, looking over his shoulder to ensure he had their attention. He repeated this twice, clearly patterned here: "Come, now tail high, ears forward." The deputies, two besides the sheriff with glinting badges, exchanged looks implying they thought the wolf's story was exaggerated until now. The sheriff, having seen him at the cabin door, heard the girl's account and noted how the animal sat calmly in the yard during fence inspection, lowered his coffee slowly, eyes fixed on the wolf. His voice, firm and less skeptical, said, "Something's wrong up there. Get your coats in the stretcher. If I'm wrong, we'll laugh about it later." They weren't wrong. The truck started with a cough, then settled into a steady growl, its plow angled to clear snow as they left the lot. The wolf led initially, guiding them out of town, then veered aside as the road narrowed, keeping pace with the headlights, the beam cutting through the storm. Inside, the men communicated via radios about an unknown injury on the ridge, possible fall, severe weather. The siren stayed silent. No one else was around except the trees. At the turnoff to the old logging road toward the ravine, the wolf veered into deeper drifts, trusting the humans to follow as far as their machine could and then on foot. The truck abruptly stopped where snow overwhelmed its heavy tires, doors opened, boots hit the ground, gear clanked as ropes were carried and the stretcher pulled out. Flashlights flickered, beams weaving as men navigated the shadowed undergrowth. On the ravine's edge, the man shouted through the wind, raising his arm with a flashlight to show his position. His face looked older in the harsh light, lines deepened by worry and cold, frost on his beard, yet his voice remained steady as he relayed updates and commands to the rescue team below. The wolf stood nearby, panting, muscles vibrating with exhaustion yet alert, as if the hardest part was over. The rescue unfolded efficiently, ropes tied to sturdy trees, a deputy carefully lowering himself, and the stretcher moved with precise strength and coordination. The injured man cried out briefly, sharp sounds almost cut off, and the wolf flinched at each, ears lowered, tail tucked slightly but not fully. Pain was a language he deeply understood. When the stranger's limp form finally appeared, strapped to the stretcher with a shen face and blue-tinged lips, the wolf stepped closer unconsciously. The hunter's eyes fluttered open as the cold wind struck him again on the ravine's edge. Instead of focusing on the group of faces or the flashlight's glare, he saw the wolf beyond, a dark shape against the snow. Recognition flickered briefly, and his cracked lips whispered, inaudibly to others, but understandable to the wolf, "You came back." Though he hadn't been there with this man before, the hunter's mind linked the wolf to ancient stories of guides and saviors when nature shows mercy. His hand feebly reached out, fingers brushing the wolf's fur as the stretcher shifted. The brief, awkward touch carried scent and meaning: blood, fear, gratitude, stale truck odors, and a hint of child's shampoo, implying a life beyond guns and solitude. Back in town, the story would condense these layered minutes into a simpler narrative. People say the hunter fell into a ravine during the storm and would have frozen or bled out if not rescued. They mention that the man on the slope called, but his radio's limited range and the nearly impassable road hampered help. What truly brought the sheriff in time was a gray wolf wearing a collar, crashing into the station's door and leading the truck into the blizzard with unwavering determination. Some dismiss it as luck or coincidence, viewing these incidents as accidents woven into a frightened story. Others, who saw the wolf's eyes that night, believe there's more, that the world harbors stranger loyalties. The injured man, once conscious in hospital, told how he lay in the ravine, gazing at the wolf above, thinking it was his last sight, until he felt its cold nose on his leg, then heard paws and subsequent footsteps with lights. He insisted it hadn't just wandered by, it had gone and summoned help. It had chosen. The wolf no longer heard the retellings as humans told them at counters and gas pumps, but he sensed a change in town's air. The smell of fear lingered in some places, people stiffening when he passed. Hands resting on guns, yet curiosity and respect had begun to replace hostility. Children tugged at sleeves, whispering that's him, their voices excited, while elders fell silent, their eyes respecting him silently. On the ridge by the stove's crackle, the man would sometimes rest his hand on the wolf's neck longer, unconsciously touching the scar from the bear's claws, the first wound in his transformation. Emma, reading in her chair, would smile softly at the feel of everything being just right. Outside, foxes, deer, and some of his own kind moved through the snow, carrying a quiet rumor that was forming. Somewhere on this ridge, a wolf tore traps, faced teeth, guided lost children and broken men to warmth, his scent blending wild and human, at times at peace, but never fully at war. By summer's warmth, the wolf's muzzle had slowly gone silver. No one could tell exactly when the first white hairs appeared. His eyes remained bright, a deep reflective amber that caught the light, hinting at thought. The fur along his flanks was looser over muscles that no longer moved him through the forest with ease. Old scars, once faint lines under thick fur, had become more visible as age thinned the coat, a map of his life, the diagonal bare slash, faint marks from his brother's teeth, tiny nicks from brush, traps, and encounters with the untamed world. The cabin had subtly changed too. A new porch section wrapped around the side, weathered and sun-bleached, added for mornings when inside and outside felt too limited. Flower boxes overflowed with wildflowers Emma had coaxed into bloom, their colors small but bold against the dark wood. Inside, drawings and photographs cluttered the walls, sketches of the creek, trees, a wolf's head, and faded pictures of Emma at different ages, her father younger and less marked, a gray shape at the man's feet or under the kitchen table, eyes half closed. The yard, once just dirt and grass, where Emma threw a ball to a clumsy wolf pup, now showed more footprints and play areas. A swing hung from a sturdy pine branch, its ropes smoothed by use, with a bare crescent of ground beneath from many small shoes. Tracks of dogs and wolves varied in size and overlapped, telling their stories. On weekends, children and parents brought pies and stories, filling the yard with lively blurred bodies, kids running with wolf pups, hands in fur, tails thumping, laughter and yips echoing off the cabin. The old wolf rested on the grassy slope above, shaped by years, with ribs rising and falling, head on paws. From there, he saw the yard, forest edge, and the town's faint outline beyond the valley. The sun dipped toward distant hills, casting long shadows through trees, making dust and insects shimmer gold. The warm air carried the sweet scent of sun-warmed pine, dry earth, crushed grass, and the lively smell of children who played all day. Two of his blood moved gracefully through chaos like young animals with long legs and sudden sprints, making their canine and human cousins squeal in delight. One was a lean gray wolf pup, with a darker streak along his spine, eyes matching the old male's, and a jawline reminiscent of his father's youthful face. The other sported a reddish coat, hinting at a fox ancestor, with quick, precise moves and constantly twitching ears. They wove through a group of town children like currents, sometimes leading, sometimes trailing, aware of each other's positions, tails high with joy, not dominance. The children sensed sunscreen, sweat, Dish soap, plastic toys, grass stains, and scraped knees mingled with the familiar smell of their parents' cautious acceptance, coffee, gasoline, faint factory or office air, and the wildness after a day on the ridge. Laughter burst freely, punctuated by occasional falls and comforting voices, then resumed play. Behind him, a larger, careful presence moved steadily from the trees, wise, not weak. The old wolf lifted his head and turned, ears alert, as his brother emerged from between the trunks, his muzzle now streaked with gray. Still broad-shouldered, but softened by time, the years had smoothed some of his sharp edges, once carved by challenge and pride. When their eyes met, there was no anger left from the fox in the snow. Instead, a weary wisdom reflected a slow but certain understanding. They paused silently, the space between filled with ghosts of past arguments and hunts, paths once separate that could have been shared. The brother then sat on the grass beside the old wolf, shoulders nearly touching, bodies aligned in wolf-like harmony, facing the same way, observing together. The scents on his fur revealed stories of the pack noisy pups, a fading matriarch, a rival driven off, the endless cycle of life and death in the forest. For a moment, they simply watched the scene below, young wolves and humans playing, rules made and broken with joy, the yard once foreign to the wild, now integrated into its ongoing story. A boy with freckles and grass-stained knees threw a stick too hard. One of the wolf pups dashed after it excitedly, overshot, skidded, tumbled in dust and fur, making everyone laugh. It then shook itself vigorously, tongue lolling in embarrassed delight. A girl with a missing front tooth clung to the young reddish wolf's neck, her fingers deep in its thick fur. The animal tolerated or wait patiently, occasionally licking her ear, causing shrieks and giggles. The brother's gaze paused on them, narrowing in thought. He said with a low rumbling sound that sounded like a simple exhale, but conveyed curiosity, acknowledgement, and concession. "You are right," he implied through his breath's direction, ear tilt, and slight head dip. "There's another way." The old wolf's chest moved slowly, ribs more visible than in his prime, but his eyes brightened at that realization. He tilted his head slightly to glance at his brother, observing the lines etched by time around his muzzle, the relaxed set of his mouth, and how his body, once tense for fights, now rested comfortably on the ground. He nudged his nose softly against his sibling's neck, a gesture of forgiveness, gratitude, and quiet pride in finally making his point understood. Below, Emma stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on a towel, her hair pinned unevenly with stray strands catching the sunset. Aging now, her eyes showed lines from years of squinting and laughing. Her confident movements reflected a life rooted in the land with no plans to leave. She whistled sharply, sending a clear note through the yard's noise, prompting children and wolves to turn toward her. Her voice called out names and chores: water, wash up, supper, as obedient and rebellious energies gradually moved toward the house in the aroma of food. Among the crowd, a young wolf detached and headed up the slope toward the older males. His coat was a mottled mix of gray and brown, his limbs learning their strength, his eyes bright with excitement and uncertainty, on the verge of choosing his path. The scents on him blended cabin, forest, town smoke, sap, gasoline, and river mud, a complex scent of a creature whose journey crossed old boundaries. Approaching eagerly, tail wagging low, head dipped, his open body language questioned. When he reached them, he sat, then lay with paws forward, eyes flicking between the old wolf and the brother, weighing their stories. He made a small questioning sound the old wolf instantly recognized from a lifetime of hearing the same tone in Emma's voice, the lost girl's, and the man's, when asking for guidance, a plea for sense, and a framework to hold the world. The old wolf shifted, lifting his head despite neck stiffness, gazing over the yard and trees, tracing invisible lines connecting his life from the snow den where he last felt his mother's breath, to the smoky human house where he opened his eyes, to the bear's claw, Emma's small hands, his brother's teeth, trap springs, the trembling fox, the bear's scent in darkness. the lost girl's fingers in his fur, and the stranger's weak grasp at the ravine. He lacked words to contain these memories, but they weighed heavily in his bones, shaping his movement through the world. He briefly touched his nose to the younger wolf's forehead, a precise gesture conveying in silence that strength has many facets: teeth, speed, survival skills, but also the willingness to bridge worlds and hold a space, even amid howls. The breeze shifted, carrying sounds from the yard: the clanking pot, a child's faint argument about vegetables, a wolf pup's yip at the scent of meat, and the distant chorus on the ridge, their howls rising in greeting and territory. The old wolf listened, flicking his ears, breathing slowly, his heartbeat steady but lighter than before. He no longer felt torn when the forest called or when the cabin's light flickered in the dark. Instead, he felt fulfilled, as if his long struggle to reconcile his dual nature had finally merged without conflict. His semi-closed eyes watched the setting sun, warmth on his fur gentle and calming, and in a drifting haze he saw not separate groups, but a single, flowing tapestry: wolves, humans, dogs, children sharing the land without fear, lives gradually weaving into a peaceful whole. Deep inside, he knew that harsh winters and traps had taken their toll, that teeth in the dark, storms, fear, and hunger would always exist, driving creatures to dark choices. His actions hadn't changed the world into something innately kinder, but it had been nudged. New paths appeared, worn by paws and boots. Trustful gestures, once impossible, became normal: a child's hand in a wolf's ruff, a hunter lowering his rifle at the edge of sight, an alpha allowing subordinates between pack and prey without bloodshed. These small acts, in the realm of mountains and centuries, were the only meaningful changes, living in bodies and habits, not just stories. He exhaled slowly, releasing the last of his old tension, his skin feeling lighter. The younger wolf at his paws shifted closer, pressing his shoulder as a quiet reminder of someone to remember, someone to continue the paths he opened. His brother's flank warmed him, the steady heartbeat a reminder that reconciliation, though not guaranteed, was possible. As the light faded and stars appeared, the forest sounds shifted to night crickets in the grass, an owl replacing the hawk, the creek's murmur deepening into secrecy. In the cabin, voices floated through an open window, Emma's laughter clear among them, the man's deeper tone responding, others from town weaving in and out as dishes clattered. On a wall near the door, among photos and sketches, a piece of paper fluttered slightly in the breeze. It was a child's drawing of a wolf with a collar, standing between a house and trees, with stick figure people and scribbled pups at its feet, all orbiting a simple, lovingly crafted shape. The old wolf's eyes closed fully, settling into a deep, steady rhythm of true rest, rather than a light doze of constant vigilance. In his final moment of awareness, before slipping into dreams beyond anyone's call, he felt no exile or clear sense of belonging to one side. Only the simple, profound truth that he had lived authentically with teeth and scars, and that, by doing so, he had helped forge a broader path in this small corner of forest and town, where being one thing didn't mean closing the door on others.